Common ownership is a principle according to which the assets of an organization, enterprise, or community are held indivisibly rather than in the names of the individual members or groups of members. The principle of holding the means of production in common with free access to the output is taken to be the defining feature of a genuine communist society. Common ownership of the means of production is advocated, or asserted, by communism and some forms of socialism. Advocates make a distinction between collective ownership and common property. The former refers to property owned jointly by agreement, such as producer cooperatives, whereas the latter refers to assets that are completely open for access, such as a public park freely available to everyone. History. Pre-Neolithic tribes held property in common through tradition. Thus, common ownership of land is an example of customary land ownership in tribal societies which predates the arrangement of colonized alienated land. Marxist theory describes this primitive communism as based on common ownership on a subsistence level. Another term for this arrangement is a gift economy, or communalism. Movement in the UK. The principle was adopted by the A New Wave Workers unregistered trademark cooperative movement during the 1970s, and continues into the present day, although it is less common. In 1976, the British Parliament passed the Industrial Common Ownership Act, which gave £100,000 of seed funding to the Industrial Common Ownership movement and £50,000 to the Scottish Cooperative Development Committee, respectively. ICOM was fueled by three strands of thought: Christian socialism, Workers unregistered trademark control and Orisons and also alternativism and successfully promoted the creation of over 2,000 worker unregistered trademark cooperatives, before merging in 2001 with the Cooperative Union to form Cooperatives UK, thus reuniting the worker cooperative and consumer cooperative sectors. In parallel, the growth of some 60 local cooperative development agencies, supported by local authorities, gave on-the-spot start-up assistance to groups wanting to create a cooperative. Some local retail cooperative societies were also active. By combining personal, community, and business development, this movement brought many disadvantaged people the opportunity to go into business for themselves on the basis of economic democracy, equal opportunities, and social inclusion. Finance. The ICO Act also established a £250,000 rotating loan fund managed by Industrial Common Ownership Finance Limited. ICOF since 2005 trading as cooperative and community finance has grown steadily and now manages a range of funds totaling some £4.5 million. Some of these have been endowed by public bodies, and others were raised through public subscription. This was the start of the ethical investment movement in Britain. Currently, as signalled by the British Labour Party unregistered trademark's abandonment of a clause for of its constitution, which called for common ownership and was printed on party membership cards, ideology has given way to pragmatism, and the social enterprise movement focuses on outcomes rather than structures. Common ownership and socialism. Many socialist movements advocate the common ownership of the means of production by all of society as an eventual goal to be achieved through the development of the productive forces, although many socialists classify socialism as public ownership of the means of production, reserving common ownership for what Karl Marx termed upper stage communism. From a Marxist analysis, society based on a superabundance of goods and common ownership of the means of production would be devoid of classes based on ownership of productive property. Therefore, public or state ownership of industry is seen as a temporary measure to be adopted during the transition from capitalism to socialism, which will eventually be displaced by common ownership as state authority becomes obsolete as class distinctions evaporate. Common ownership in a hypothetical communist society is distinguished from primitive forms of common property that have existed throughout history, such as communalism and primitive communism, in that communist common ownership is the outcome of technological developments leading to superabundance. It is the practical application of the socialist desire to achieve the common ownership of the means of production Its purpose, by preventing control being obtained through the purchase of a Compania Euro unregistered trademark S share capital, is to ensure that the founders' Euro unregistered trademark aims are pursued in perpetuity. This is particularly desirable to the founders of a workers' Euro unregistered trademark cooperative, who, inspired by solidarity and the desire to create fulfilling employment, will typically build the business up through hard and low-paid work. They may out of a sense of fairness wish to hinder future generations of employees, or their heirs, from winding up the cooperative so as to be able to share the sale proceeds among themselves. In practice, common ownership is practiced by large numbers of voluntary associations and non-profit organizations, by all charities, as well as implicitly by all public bodies. Most cooperatives have some element of common ownership, but some part of their capital may be individually owned. A very significant early influence on the movement has been the Scott-Bader Commonwealth, a composites and specialty polymer plastics manufacturing company in Wellingborough, Northamptonshire, which its owner, Ernest Bader, gave to the workforce in instalments through the late 1950s to early 1960s. In London, Calvert's is another rare example of an established worker cooperative with a policy of pay parity. The John Lewis Partnership is probably the most famous example of a worker cooperative, albeit one without pay parity. From the collective movement, one of the most successful ventures is probably Sumer Foods in Elland, West Yorkshire. UK law the principle is typically implemented through inserting two clauses in a Compania Euro unregistered trademark S Memorandum of Association, or an Industrial and Provident Societia Euro unregistered trademark S rules. The first provides that the Compania Euro unregistered trademark S assets shall be applied solely in furtherance of its objectives and may not be divided among the members or trustees. The second provides for altruistic dissolution Euro, an asset lock, whereby if the enterprise is wound up, remaining assets exceeding liabilities shall not be divided among the members but shall be transferred to another enterprise with similar aims or to charity. British law has been reluctant to entrench common ownership, insisting that a three-quarters majority of a Compania Euro unregistered trademark S members, by passing AA Euro or a special resolution Euro, have the right to amend a Compania Euro unregistered trademark S Memorandum of Association. This three-quarters majority above applies to most limited companies, except that it is possible since 2006 to entrench altruistic dissolution in an industrial and provident society registered as a community benefit society. This statutory asset lock is not available to societies registered as bona fide cooperatives. However, such entrenchment has also been written into the Community Interest Company, a new legal status that was introduced in 2005. See also. References